Hey everyone. Okay, we're going to jump into summary lecture 3 now. And I was tempted to say that this is like the most important step in the social marketing process, but that would be unfair because all steps are very, very important. And I guess because it's a marketing process, you could argue the marketing process, if you don't have marketing, then maybe that would be the most important step. But as a communication scholar, I am really, really intensely focused on issues related to audience because I believe that in order to communicate effectively and to understand communication as a process and what's working and what's not, it's all about considering who people are talking to or sending messages to and how, the characteristics of the audience sort of interact with the characteristics of the message. And if you don't know who your audience is or you haven't, tailored your message to that audience, then like communication just isn't going to work. So I love this step. It's really important for me. And I'm going to be a stickler on the worksheets about this because it is not just important to me, but it really does set the entire foundation for everything you're going to do after this. We're just going to keep coming back to the audience. So, what you're going to do this week is you're going to select a priority audience. Apparently, we don't call them target audiences anymore because targeting has sort of a negative connotation, which I do understand, but you might hear me slip up sometimes. But priority audience is the same as a target audience for those of you who prefer that terminology. So, step one is segmenting the market. And listen, if you already have a pretty clear campaign focus and purpose, you may have even talked about your audience a little bit when you were developing sort of like what you want to do and who you want to help. So that's great. That's a good starting point. But the whole idea is like if you try to make a message for everybody who fits in that category, it's probably not going to be narrow casted enough. It's not going to be targeted enough, right? So we want to segment the market a little bit so we can get really specific into what they need to hear. Then we want to evaluate those segments, and then we're actually at the end, you just select a audience. So, okay, so how do we segment a market? Um, it sounds easy and it's not hard, but as I heard a quote the other day that sort of like simple doesn't necessarily mean easy. So it is very simple, but there are some potential hiccups that I see when students do their assignments each year. So the whole idea here is to take a pretty relevant group, right? A group that you know needs help, but then segment them into even smaller groups. But it's kind of Goldilocks here. You don't want to be too segmented where you're like only focusing on like four individuals, right? And you don't want it to be too broad. So here's what you got to try to figure out. Try to think about different groups that do have something in common, right? So maybe they all have the same sort of like psychological orientation. Maybe they have the same life situation. Maybe they live in the same place, something, right? There's got to be some common denominator. And again, that could be something that you've already um, kind of had an idea about when you started to like think about your focus. But you also need to think about like how different differences within that larger group could potentially affect different ways that they would respond to what you're going to be trying to sell with this campaign. Okay. So one thing that I see, I have this little like it's kind of a joke. I have this little meme over here which talks about our target market is men and women aged 18 to 75. Okay, that's way too general, right? That's like everyone. That would be like an example of a group that's like way too large. But let's say that you were trying to convince people to get screened for colon cancer. Okay. Well, we do know it's affecting younger populations right now, but it probably, we don't need to focus on 18-year-olds, right? So maybe you would want to say, like, okay, the people who really need this screening are now, again, I'm going to extend it a little bit. Like, let's just say like 30 or 35-year-olds to, um, I don't know, 75-year-olds, whatever the case is. So, okay, we've got like a little bit of a smaller range then. But then think about how all those age groups are different. So maybe you want to say, like, oh, well, maybe the younger people would respond to this a lot more differently than the older people. So let's just compare. Do we want to focus on like the older part of that segment, or do we want to focus on the younger part of that segment? This is what I mean. The segment all has something in common. They all need to get screened for colon cancer, and there's good reasons for that. But 30-year-olds and 70-year-olds are different in a lot of ways. So trying to think about doing a campaign that hits all of them would be kind of rough. So you want that commonality, but you also want that sort of like difference. Um, things that these are just like examples of things that to help you brainstorm about what might make good segments. And I would like you, when you are doing it on your own and thinking about your own audience, to at least use two or three of these, but you don't have to use all of them. Could be geography. It could be that you're like, gosh, I'm thinking about like doing this on like a nationwide level, but maybe this is something that we only need to work on in states with like with greater people with socioeconomic status or something like that. Could have to do with where they live. Like maybe we want to focus on people who live in warmer climates because, like, I don't know, it's about mosquito, viral transmission or something. I don't know. You can, not an insectologist here. Um, Demographics. So that's what I just did with the age example and the last slide, but there's a lot of different demographics. Could be gender based, I had an example of something earlier where or actually maybe it's in your worksheet too, where I was just like, no, let's just focus on middle-aged women, because women and men can be really different in terms of what they want. So you want to, or maybe you want to compare that. It's like, well, we could think about what it would look like to target women, or we could think about what it would look like to target men, right? Family size, occupation, disability, income. Again, it all just kind of depends on what makes sense to your specific issue. There's also some really interesting behavioral segments that you can consider. This is the stuff that we like to do, professor types, in our research, right? We're always trying to figure out, like, psychologically, where are people at in terms of their readiness stage? Like, some people, know that they need a colon cancer screening and they really want one. And so maybe it's just a matter of just like sort of like helping them find the way, where there are other people that don't even realize that they're in a high risk group. They aren't thinking about it. Maybe they're scared of it for some reason, right? So there are all these sort of like differences in terms of how people are psychologically wired or acting regarding the behavior that you might want to compare. Um, and then psychographic things like political affiliation, lifestyle, things that relate to where people are sort of like in culture, if you will, right? So, to take the political affiliation example, people with different political affiliations might have different, um, I- I'm being delicate here, resistance to certain types of behavioral interventions because they've got some sort of moral conviction against some sort of, yeah, like I don't like an example from a long time ago is I remember when the Bush administration came in, again, I know a long time ago, the CDC had to sort of like rethink how they approached like issues related to safe sex because the Republican administration had very different ideas about what sort of like marketing they wanted to do to protect people from sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancy than the administration before it. So, should have planned this ahead of time, I know, but hopefully you get the idea. So the point is I'm not asking you to use all of these, but as you're just thinking about your more general population, see if you can kind of segment it based on different characteristics here that would make sense. Here's an example. Hopefully this will be helpful. Um, this is one that was taken from your book. It is not because I know anything about composting. I have a lot of plants on my property and I eat a lot of food, but I don't do any composting myself. But I know it's a thing and it exists. But the purpose of this campaign was to decrease landfill and hauling costs. And they had decided at the beginning, they were like, okay, I got an idea. Let's see if we can get people to stop throwing their food scraps like in the dumpster and instead have them compost. And you know who would be good to focus on? Gardeners, because gardeners are the type of people who would be interested in having a bunch of compost because it's going to enrich their soil and they're going to be able to grow things and whatever. So it makes a lot of sense. So they have this general population, but then they're just like, gosh, do we really want to focus on just like anybody who like likes gardening? That seems really general. Maybe we need to like narrow segment the audience a little bit and focus on like somebody who we know is going to be more receptive to sort of what we're selling, right? Um, they came up with three different segments. based on behaviors. So this is an example of, so the avid gardeners here is where the common denominator is. But then they're like, well, what if let's compare people who are putting their waste in these like yard waste containers. So maybe they're already throwing waste outside versus people who are putting them in the garbage containers and it's going to the landfill, which remember the purpose is to decrease landfill and hauling costs. Versus people who, and this is me, who put a lot of stuff down the garbage disposal, right? No, I don't want to go for the sake of time. I'm not going to compare all three of these, but you could. The next step now is like if once you have those segments and you're like, okay, all of these would be probably good segments to focus on, but we can't do everything. So how do we narrow it down? There are four criteria that you need to evaluate each of those segments on. And when I say each, I mean each. A lot of times when students are doing this, they already have in mind the segment they want. So they just like talk about how the segment that they want, like basically fits all of these needs. But what we're looking for is a relative comparison. Okay. I'll come back to that in a second. Greatest need. So that is in terms of like, okay, if we focus on this segment, how much are they going to help us like make a dent in the problem that we're trying to solve essentially. It could be because there's a lot of people who fit into that category. It could be because what they're doing is causing the most damage. Or maybe they just need the most help. Okay. So maybe the problem involves them and they're the people who, like their defenselessness of the segment. They're defenseless and so they need more assistance. Greatest readiness to act. So this is about basically how willing do you think people would be to change their behaviors in a way that would help you or not? Because here's the thing, there might be people who really need some sort of intervention, but they're going to be 100% resistant to it, in which case, kind of like, what's the point, of trying to push them? Oops. Easiest and least costly to reach. You're going to have to use your imagination with this a little bit, but in an actual campaign development process, you would be talking about things like, okay, well, we've got tools to reach this audience pretty affordably because we can just put up flyers and, I don't know, like the local gardening center or something, and it would be really cheap. I don't know, but the idea is you want to kind of brainstorm about like could you even find these people if you needed to get them a message? And then if you can find them, is it going to be affordable or are you going to be paying like millions of dollars in social media advertisements when you don't have to? And then finally, best match. And this has to do kind of like with sort of, it's a little bit of a branding consideration. Remember, um, in the last step, I told you I want you to kind of like get an idea of like what organization you want to represent. And lots of different organizations can tackle the same problem, but each organization kind of does things differently. So maybe, for instance, Greenpeace is going to tackle a problem one way, but that's going to, and maybe it's about, I don't know, what is Greenpeace doing? I mean, Greenpeace does like environmental promotions and stuff, but that's going to look very different than like what, a government organization, what the EPA does, right? They might actually have like similar goals in mind, but the way that they do it, the things that they're known for, they have sort of a brand. And so that's how I like to think about this best match. Think about like if I'm going to focus on one of these segments, does it make sense for sort of who this organization is, right? Does it fit with like does the identity of the audience sort of fit with the identity of the organization? And does it align with like the stuff that we're doing, the resources that we have, stuff like that? Okay, so now how do you do this? I used to make students actually go and do this. I'm not making this a requirement, but I want to show you how it works because I still think if you get the logic of this, you'll understand what I'm looking for in terms of these relative comparisons. So again, the goal is you have audiences. I only have two right here, but let's say you have three audiences. You want to take those four criteria and see how each one measures up. And then you want to sort of compare it all and say, okay, across all of these four criteria, this audience segment really doesn't really score very highly. So I don't think they would be the best one. But this one, ticks a lot of boxes. Okay. So this is a strategy that you can use to, quote, tick those boxes a little bit. You can literally rank them. And honestly, you can use any kind of scale you want. But let's just say If somebody scores a one, if one of the audiences scores a one on one of these criteria, then that means like, yeah, they don't really meet that criteria as much as if, if they score a five, that's the greatest. So I won't go through all of them. I'll just give you a little bit of a taste. But so if we say like, okay, how much do avid gardeners who put most of their food waste in garbage containers contribute to this need? Remember, need is about like what kind of contribution are they making to the problem? Well, if the whole point of the problem is landfill waste, right, and they're putting it in garbage containers, then they contribute the most to the problem. So I would give them a five here, okay? But then compare that to avid gardeners who are putting most of their waste down the drain. Well, listen, I'm not saying that putting waste down the drain is necessarily a good thing, but they're not really sad, they're not really doing much in terms of need. They're not really contributing a lot to the problem. So I would give them more like a two. Okay. So that's if you're evaluating them in that category, then avid gardeners putting most food waste down the garbage containers would definitely get like a five, right? But you can see I went down and I did this for all of the four criteria. And ultimately, yes, when you add it all up, and there are, by the way, if you read your textbook, they'll show you there are ways to weight these differently. Like if you really don't care about match, you can just weight it less or whatever, however you want to do it. And I'm not telling you you have to rank it, but mentally, I still want you to be in the headspace of like, okay, can I just compare all of my different segments on all of these criteria and explain how one of them is a little better or a little worse than the other one? Or sometimes they might just be the same. I mean, I ranked them as both three and five for reach and match, so they were equal. And that might happen. I mean, you might compare segments and you might find that your audiences or your segments are just like all pretty much equal. In which case, you're just gonna have to justify like why, given that they're all equal, you still think it's better to go with one or another. Because I do want you to have the experience of narrowing it down and segmenting it. But okay, so based on this, because I use the ranking system, for this campaign, I would pick avid gardeners putting most of their food waste in the garbage containers, and that is my priority audience for that campaign. Um, and that is it, but I'm just gonna like warn you right now that I want you to get really good at this week because the next time we are going to talk about picking a priority, sorry, not a priority. We're going to talk about picking a target behavioral objective, and the process is the exact same. You're just going to compare different behaviors, and then you're going to rank them or draw relative comparisons about how they line up on different criteria, and that's it. And hopefully, because we've already done this, I won't have to say as much about it. So, all right, looking forward to seeing those worksheets. Bye.